History is written by the victors, but the truth is often hidden.
This is Hidden Chapter.
Introduction. History is rarely a complete story. It is often a carefully selected version of events, shaped by power, victory, and survival. When people talk about the United States of America, the narrative usually begins with freedom, democracy, and opportunity. Textbooks describe a young nation born from courage and ideals, rising against tyranny to become a symbol of liberty. But history is not built only on ideals. It is built on decisions, some celebrated, others quietly ignored. Long before the United States became a nation, this land was already a stage for power struggles, economic ambitions, and silent conflicts. These early foundations shaped everything that came after. This documentary does not seek to accuse. It does not seek to glorify. It seeks to understand. Tonight, we begin with the chapters that are rarely explained in full. This is Hidden Chapters. Before America had a name, before the word America represented a country, it represented opportunity and competition. The land that would later become the United States was not empty, and it was not unknown. It was already mapped, explored, traded, and fought over by multiple powers. European empires did not arrive with the same intentions. Spain sought wealth. France sought influence. Britain sought permanence. Each power approached the land with strategy, not curiosity. Trade routes were established before cities. Economic control often came before political control. Alliances were formed and broken long before independence was ever discussed. What history books often simplify as colonization was, in reality, a long and calculated contest for dominance. The empire mindset. Empires do not expand randomly. They expand where profit, security, and control intersect. Britain's interest in North America was not purely ideological. It was economic. Raw materials flowed across the Atlantic. Timber, tobacco, fur, and later agriculture fed the growing demands of the empire. Colonies were not meant to be independent. They were meant to serve. Local governance existed, but true authority remained overseas. Taxes were imposed. Trade was regulated. Expansion was controlled. Over time, frustration grew, not among the powerless, but among the powerful within the colonies. Those with land, wealth, and influence wanted more freedom to expand westward, trade independently, and control local economies. This tension would later be reframed as a universal struggle for liberty, but its roots were far more specific. The road to conflict, the American Revolutionary War, is often described as inevitable. History suggests otherwise. For years, compromise was possible. Negotiations occurred. Warnings were issued, but economic pressure intensified. Britain faced debt from global wars. The colonies were seen as a solution. Taxes increased. Restrictions tightened. Authority hardened. Resistance followed not immediately with weapons, but with organization, messaging, and political coordination. Committees formed. Narratives were shaped. Public opinion was influenced. The war that followed was not just a rebellion. It was a calculated gamble, and it worked. Independence and its unfinished promise. Independence changed everything and solved very little. The new nation was free from imperial rule, but deeply divided internally. Power shifted from distant control to local elites. Questions emerged immediately. Who would lead? Who would benefit? Who would be protected? The Constitution was a compromise document. Brilliant, but cautious. Visionary, but incomplete. It created a system strong enough to survive and flexible enough to evolve, but it also left unresolved tensions that would resurface again and again. Expansion without war. One of the least discussed aspects of early American growth is how much land changed hands without major battles. Treaties replaced invasions. Purchases replaced conquest. Negotiation replaced bloodshed, at least on the surface. Borders moved quietly. Maps were redrawn calmly. Power expanded silently. This method was efficient. It was also permanent. The nation grew faster than its institutions could adapt, and with growth came imbalance. The beginning of a pattern by the early 1800s. A pattern was emerging. Economic ambition drove political decisions. Expansion shaped national identity. Power concentrated gradually, not suddenly. America was no longer just defending itself. It was positioning itself. This was not yet an empire, but the foundation was already there. Closing of Part 1. The story of America does not begin with greatness. It begins with complexity. Every nation has origins. Few are simple. In the next chapter, we will explore how expansion transformed America from a young republic into a continental power, and what was lost along the way. History did not hide these chapters. They were simply never read closely. This is Hidden Chapters. At the beginning of the 20th century, the United States was not only expanding its cities and factories, but also reshaping the invisible structure of power, in a way most ordinary citizens could never see, because while public attention remained fixed on progress, innovation, and national pride, a quieter transformation was taking place behind closed doors where influence mattered more than elections and access mattered more than laws. Industrial growth created the illusion of opportunity, yet beneath that surface, the concentration of wealth began accelerating at a pace never witnessed before as a small number of financial and industrial entities gained control over railroads, steel, oil, banking, and communication. Networks slowly weaving an interconnected system where competition was replaced by coordination and public choice was replaced by managed outcomes. This period marked the rise of a new kind of authority, one that did not rely on uniforms or armies, but instead operated through contracts, credit, and control of resources, because when access to money, employment, and information could be decided by a handful of institutions, resistance became economically impossible for the average citizen. Public narratives continued to celebrate freedom while private agreements quietly limited it, as lawmakers increasingly depended on financial backing from the same interests they were supposed to regulate, creating a loop where policy no longer originated from public demand, but from private necessity, and the distance between the citizen and the decision-maker grew wider each year without a single announcement ever being made. The most effective aspect of this transformation was its invisibility, because nothing appeared to change overnight. Elections still happened, newspapers still printed optimism, and the language of democracy remained intact. Yet the real shift occurred in who controlled stability and instability, because once economic pressure became a tool, social behavior could be shaped without force. Fear did not need to be manufactured loudly. It only needed to be implied through uncertainty, job insecurity, market fluctuations, and selective reporting, which taught people that safety came from compliance, and that questioning the system carried personal risk, even if that risk was never explicitly stated. By the time global conflict approached, American society had already been conditioned to accept centralized decisions in the name of protection, efficiency, and national interest, making it easier for extraordinary measures to be introduced without extraordinary resistance. As the United States moved deeper into the era of global conflict, the relationship between government, industry, and media began to tighten into a single coordinated force, because war did not only require soldiers and weapons, it required belief, unity, and silence, and those elements could only be secured if information itself was managed carefully and consistently across every public channel. What most citizens experienced as patriotic messaging was, in reality, the first large-scale synchronization of narrative, where newspapers, radio broadcasts, and later film all echoed the same framing of events, not because of coincidence, but because access, licensing, and financial survival now depended on alignment with approved perspectives. This period revealed a critical truth about modern power, which was that controlling perception could achieve what physical force never could, because when people willingly support decisions they do not understand, resistance disappears without confrontation, and accountability dissolves without protest. Economic expansion during wartime created unprecedented profits for manufacturers, suppliers, and financiers, while the human cost remained abstracted into distant statistics, allowing prosperity and sacrifice to coexist in the public mind without contradiction, which further reinforced the idea that national success and private enrichment were naturally aligned. After the conflict ended, the infrastructure built to manage opinion was never dismantled, because systems once proven effective are rarely abandoned. Instead, they are refined, redirected, and normalized until their presence feels inevitable rather than imposed. This normalization meant that future crises no longer needed justification, they only needed repetition, because familiarity reduces skepticism, and when extraordinary measures become routine, they stop being questioned entirely. The average citizen entered the post-war era believing stability had been secured, yet unaware that the mechanisms designed for emergency control were now embedded permanently within economic and political life, ensuring that future decisions would always favor predictability over transparency and order over truth. Education, media, and employment gradually aligned around the same priorities, rewarding conformity, discouraging inquiry, and redefining success as participation rather than understanding, which created a society that functioned efficiently while knowing very little about how decisions were actually made. By this stage, power no longer needed secrecy because it had achieved something more effective, which was acceptance, as the system itself became invisible, hidden not by darkness, but by normalization, making the idea of alternatives seem unrealistic or dangerous, rather than merely different. As global tensions shifted from open battlefields to ideological confrontation, the United States entered a period where conflict no longer required visible enemies because the idea of threat itself became sufficient to mobilize resources, justify surveillance, and silence dissent while appearing defensive rather than aggressive. This era transformed fear into a permanent condition where danger was presented as everywhere and nowhere at the same time, allowing authority to expand without limits, since an undefined threat can never be conclusively defeated, only managed indefinitely. Economic structures adapted quickly as defense spending, research, funding, and intelligence operations created entire industries dependent on the continuation of tension, which meant peace was no longer economically neutral but financially disruptive for institutions that now relied on instability for growth. Public messaging reinforced this balance by framing security as obedience and questioning, vulnerability ensuring that skepticism could be portrayed not as civic responsibility but as risk to collective safety. The concept of loyalty was redefined during this period, shifting from constitutional values to ideological alignment, where belief became more important than action and perception more important than truth. Those who controlled messaging gained the ability to collapse complex realities into simple binaries of us and them, creating emotional clarity while eliminating nuance. Because nuance invites thought, and thought invites resistance. Over time, this structure conditioned society to accept contradiction without discomfort, allowing freedom and surveillance, prosperity and anxiety, innovation and stagnation to exist simultaneously without triggering widespread awareness of the underlying imbalance. By embedding control within routine practices rather than emergency measures, authority no longer needed visible enforcement, because compliance had become habitual and dissent had become socially costly rather than legally dangerous. This marked the moment when the hidden architecture of influence achieved maturity, no longer experimental, no longer contested, and largely unquestioned, because it no longer felt external, it felt normal. As decades passed, the systems built during earlier crises did not weaken. Instead, they became more refined, more efficient, and more deeply integrated into everyday life, making it increasingly difficult to separate governance from influence and information from intention, because the same structures now guided policy, economics, and perception simultaneously. Technological advancement accelerated this process by compressing time and distance, allowing narratives to spread instantly while reducing opportunities for reflection, which meant responses became emotional before they could become analytical and reactions replaced understanding as the dominant form of public engagement. Economic cycles began repeating with recognizable patterns: expansion, contraction, anxiety, recovery, yet each cycle transferred more stability upward and more uncertainty downward, reinforcing dependence while presenting fluctuation as natural rather than engineered. During this period, citizens were encouraged to measure success through consumption, productivity, and alignment rather than autonomy or comprehension, which shifted identity from individual agency to systemic participation, making disengagement feel like failure rather than freedom. The language of choice remained central, yet available options narrowed quietly over time, because real choice requires access to information, and when information becomes filtered, choice becomes symbolic rather than functional. Media environments multiplied, but ownership consolidated, creating the illusion of diversity while maintaining consistency of framing, ensuring that variation existed in style but not in conclusion, which allowed debate without disruption and discussion without consequence. By the end of this era, the public had been trained not to ask who benefits, but to ask what happens next, because anticipation replaced investigation and momentum replaced accountability. This stage completed the transition from visible authority to invisible guidance, where power no longer issued commands, it shaped environments and allowed behavior to emerge predictably without instruction.